Are you ready? Okay. You say potato and I say potato. I say tomato and you say tomato. Potato, potato, tomato, tomato. Let's call the whole thing off. I say it's Chaska.
I say it's Chaska.
I say it's Calhoun.
I say McCoska.
Chaska,
Chaska.
Calhoun,
McCoska.
We better call the calling off. Let's call the whole thing off. I have to start the show.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, please say hello to the cast of the Theater of Public Policy. It's Duck Washington, Fred Chang, Aaron Roberts, Brandon Boat, and Alexis Camille. And now, coming to you from an undisclosed location, I can't say any more about it right now, it's your host for the evening, Tane Danger.
Hi! Hello! Oh, there's a dog here. It's great. It's good. Hi, everybody. My name is Tane Danger. I am your host for this evening for this show that we call the Theater of Public Policy in just a perfect putting together of 2020. Normally, I do these shows live from the Bryant Lake Bowl, and it's wonderful because the Bryant Lake Bowl has been our home theater for years, and it means a lot to us to get to still broadcast the show live from there. Tonight, at about 6:45 p.m., all of the internet just went down and stopped working at the Bryant Lake Bowl. And so I was very lucky that none other than cast member Alexis Camille lives about half a block away. And so she said, come over. And so right now, if this background looks familiar, it is because the same one that Alexis is going to be using for the rest. Look, there she is. So we're on the same place, just Alexis deserves a big round of applause for saving the day, making sure that I'm still part of the show tonight. So that explains why this looks different than before, but I'm super excited to be here. My name's Tane Danger. This is the show where we talk to some very smart people about a big issue or set of ideas, and then we have this team of amazing improv comedy performers who takes everything that we have talked about and bring it to life through entirely unscripted improv comedy. Tonight is a very fun show. Very fun. We felt like the world is kind of like stressful and there's a lot of really big, heavy news out there. So let's just do an easy, light topic that just will make everybody sort of smile and laugh. And so we're going to talk about how to rename places that are named after problematic or even racist people and, do improv comedy about it. Simple. No, it's actually a really important conversation that's been coming up a lot in this community for the last several years, and almost certainly will be coming up, hopefully, a lot for years to come. So, but we're going to dive into it, and we have two amazing guests to help us do it. Before I bring them out, I should say a couple of thank yous about who makes this whole thing possible. Normally, I would thank the Bryant Lake Bowl. I'm still going to thank the Bryant Lake Bowl. They're still great. They're still amazing. They're our home theater. Probably by the time that you would get to go to them, their internet will be working. So this is the important thing. Bryant Lake Bowl in uptown Minneapolis is alive. They are doing delivery service as well as eat-in service, socially distanced. And we want you to go and patronize them because there's been a lot written over the last several days about how uptown is dying. I am going to just tell you, it's not going to die unless you let it die. Don't let it die. Come to the Bryant Lake Bowl, order some bibimbap or a rice bowl, or my favorite, the Rachel, and make sure that this amazing bowling alley, cabaret theater, and restaurant survive for years to come. My second thank you is to our beer sponsor, Finnegan's Beer. Look at that. Finnegan's has been our beer sponsor for a long time. I love Finnegan's because A, their beer is delicious. B, they donate 100% of their profits to feeding the hungry. And so if you buy a Finnegan's beer, you're helping a local Minneapolis company. You are helping feed the local community, and you are getting some delicious beer. So please go get some Finnegan's beer. If you need added incentive, if you go to their website and order a growler for pickup, you can use the code T2P2 and you get 20% off of your growler order. So it's really great. Finnegan's is delicious. I'm going to drink this during the show to ease my stress about the fact that I had to relocate my entire status 5 seconds before the show started. But we should dive into our conversation tonight because there's a lot to talk about. And as I said at the top, we have two of the best guests I can think of for us to grapple with this. So first up, I'll introduce, he has actually been a guest on our show at least once before when he was part of the search committee searching for the next president of the University of Minnesota. He was serving as a regent of the University of Minnesota at that time, but he has a resume that is longer than I could possibly get into for this show. I will just say that he holds a BA, a master's in public policy, and a PhD in comparative developmental education, all from the University of Minnesota. This is an amazing person. Please, wherever you are, big round of applause. Abdul Omari, everybody. They're applauding at home. You have to imagine.
I can hear them.
Yeah, you can hear them. All down the street they are. All right, and then second and certainly not least, he is serving right now as deputy director of the Minnesota Historical Society, where he has really had sort of a leadership position in grappling with this very issue that we are talking about tonight. So please, again, wherever you are, a big round of applause for Kevin Maijala. Big round of applause. Yay! Hi, Kevin. Thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here.
Okay, so we're here to, this is a very big, weighty topic. I'm going to actually start with what maybe is an overly simple question, and I'll start with you, Kevin. We're talking about when and how to rename places that are named after someone who we look at through a lens and realize this is a problematic name to have connected with this thing. But before we even get to renaming places, why do we name places after people to begin with?
Yeah, that's a key question, because when you really look at what we're struggling with now, what we're grappling with as a society is we're looking at how we honor people. We're looking at how we set standards for acknowledging someone who's been important to either a community, a state, a country, whatever it is. And so what typically happens is a person holds a position of some power, some influence, some importance, and a set of people, typically after they die, make arrangements. They start to look at things that can honor that person. You think about Alexander Ramsey, the first governor of the state, who also was essentially put into state history through naming of Ramsey County, Ramsey School, all sorts of different things. So it's really about honoring a person for their contributions, and typically is done without a lot of introspection about perhaps some of the things that might be problematic. And as we've moved through time, we learn more about people, we understand more, and we start listening to people who weren't at the table when those original nominations for names and choices were made. And that's when we really grapple with who we are as a society today in comparison to what was being looked at when something was named after a particular person.
So, well, I think about, just to keep on this point for one more second, I think about this, one of the big public examples of renaming that we've had here in the Twin Cities community was Lake Calhoun, which had been historically Bde-Maka, the original Dakota name, and then was renamed Lake Calhoun. And now we've gone back to Bde-Maka. But the piece that I've always struggled with this is why we named a lake after John C. Calhoun, who was, a vice president of the United States, sure. But as far as I know, I don't think he ever stepped foot in Minnesota. I don't think he ever did anything for Minnesota. He was much more associated with the Confederacy ultimately than he was with the North. So it's like, was that why? There are these places where it's just like, well, why was it even named after him at that point?
Absolutely. And that's about the context of the time when that decision is made. And really at that point, as leaders were basically trying to name places, they were picking famous people in their particular period that they wanted to honor. He had an association with the military that was very important. And of course, Fort Snelling was the place that was established in this Dakota land, this homeland of the Dakota. And the people there, when they started naming things, they were picking out people that were famous at that time who they thought deserved honor. And so this was a little bit prior to, in fact, he was part of the Confederacy, but a part of the U.S. military. And then that name continued. And of course, these places did have original names from the indigenous people who were here, Dakota, the Ojibwe in the north. So those are things we're struggling with now. What's the appropriate way to honor the most important factor of the history when there's complex histories that kind of overlap each other?
So, Abdul, can we talk about, we wanted to talk with you because you were really at sort of the fulcrum of a big conversation the University of Minnesota was having a couple of years ago. There's some talk about, with everything else that's kind of going on at the University of Minnesota, they're going to get back to this conversation. But can you sort of set the table of how this came up and sort of became a focus of conversation and debate at the regent level of the University of Minnesota, and what the specifics are there?
Yeah, thanks. So at the time, there was a world renowned historian at the University of Minnesota who embarked on a project with one of her graduate students called A Campus Divided. And they put together an exhibit that was housed at Anderson Library for several months that essentially outlined a certain time period of the university's history, where they unpacked and uncovered 4 former administrators who had what I would call significant racist, sexist, and xenophobic and anti-Semitic behavior that was happening, everything from spying on students and reporting to the FBI to segregated dorms, you name it, and even some intimidation around students being admitted and staying at the university. And then that shifted into a committee that did months upon months of research and essentially made a recommendation at the asking of the then president, Eric Kaler, to suggest what be done with these 4 buildings that had been named after, at a minimum, problematic administrators from our past. The most well-known is the Student Union, which is named after Lotus C. Kaufman, who was a president in our past, I think in the 30s. So we embarked upon reading this report that was, I think they were working on it for maybe 18 months or so. And the regents, from my perspective, essentially hijacked the conversation out of some, I would say, are still remain flat out racist and bigots. Others, I think, were, really grappling with what to do in a situation like this and not exactly sure what they should do.
Think about.
I mean, I don't have to hold back anymore, right? And so it turned into a situation where the faculty were attacked in meetings verbally and told that they didn't know how to do research, and really questioning the type of research that was done, ultimately resulting in a 1-10 vote, where I was the sole person who voted to rename, or actually remove, the names. I wouldn't even say rename at this point because there weren't new names to put on yet.
Ooh, okay. So that is a powerful story, frustrating story. Can you, I know you kind of cordoned off that there were different sort of factions there between folks who were just obstinate and not really grappling with, and then other ones who you felt like were. So the folks who were like actually honestly sort of grappling with some of these, what were those conversations like? What are some of the things people were weighing or trying to figure out in thinking about whether to move forward with this?
So some of the conversation revolved around whether or not the administrators at the time were being guided by the regents. There was one regent in particular who chaired the board for a very long time, who apparently kind of dictated everything that was happening behind the scenes. That was one thing. There was other folks who, kind of said, I'm an imperfect person and who am I to judge, past characters for their behavior. Racism was common at the time. These were, it was a different era. And so we can't retrospectively judge someone when they were just acting during their time. I think other folks were, either consciously or subconsciously wondering, what a measuring stick would look like moving forward. Meaning, what will be determined, unacceptable in 5 or 10 years. And then would we, look back and say, well, 10 years ago, that was not a problem. So I think those are kind of the maybe three. The other big one is we'll be erasing history. That was a big one. And everyone, I'm sure, that's listening right now has heard that one. So those were kind of some of the big ones that I think people were grappling with.
Kevin, so I've got to imagine these conversations sound very familiar. You have worked on some of these kinds of conversations around Fort Snelling and some other MNHS sites. Help us, let's just sort of pick up that piece of that measuring stick piece, because that is a piece I feel like a lot of people, and I do feel like I know a lot of people who are trying to grapple with this fairly or thoughtfully, and they say, how do we think about it in terms of I'm looking at them with this lens now? Is that fair? How much do you take into account where everybody else was then versus that individual person, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. So this idea of erasing history, these decisions that we're making as being part of forgetting the past, starts on a premise that what we know about history, or history is something we absolutely know instead of something we actually continue to expand upon and learn as we go forward. So when you think about the Regents, and I'm a proud grad of the U as well, and I've got a son there now, Hoffman is really problematic. And that's a value judgment we make every generation about our past figures, right? We look back and we look at people like Thomas Jefferson, we look at George Washington, we look at Alexander Ramsey and Henry Sibley, two of the early founders of the state and founders of the Minnesota Historical Society. And we struggle with the actions that they took that either have not been widely understood or are explained away as that was just part of being there at that time. That's really a narrow view of how we should be looking at recognition and honor. And I would argue that naming things after people is generally a bad idea. It's really intended to just honor a person but not give any additional context. And when you start adding context to any historical figure, you're going to find, and this is an individual value judgment, that there are problematic things about them, right? So that is ultimately what we're grappling with. A pretty narrow view of history is static, and we should just honor it because it is, and something that is more about expanding and understanding who we are and who we value and what we value as a society today. If I were someone of a color, a BIPOC person going to the University of Minnesota, there are buildings, knowing that history in that context, I would not feel comfortable with. And I say the same things about some of our historic sites if we're not willing to grapple with that really complex and sometimes painful legacy.
Abdul, I'm curious how much you think the folks who were grappling with this, talking about it, were committed to like a particular point of view, or I don't know, maybe picking up on what Kevin was saying, just didn't want to grapple with this other history piece, right? Like it's sort of the stuff in the closet over there is messy and dirty. Why should we spend time digging into that? What good does it do us?
Yeah. I mean, so I think, you certainly had some folks who were, I think going into it, there was no way that they were going to support bringing down names, just period. Matter of fact, one was quoted as saying that he expected to see people in white hoods with ropes that would determine if they were racist, and that wasn't there. And so I think someone like that is had already kind of made up their mind. I think there were other folks who, went into it thinking, all right, maybe there are some folks, maybe not all four, maybe there's a few that we would want to grapple with and really think about. And then I think that as time went on, it got so messy and distorted that we ended up with the vote that we had, which was we just need status quo, which is frequent, right? Oftentimes when we got to make tough decisions and people might be upset and what have you, we just resort to status quo, particularly in the Midwest and particularly in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And kind of say, well, it's not that bad, right?
Can I just ask you to say more about how it got so messy? Because you all, you're regents of the University of Minnesota. There, I can imagine somebody at home being like, if anybody was going to get together and think about this critically and sort of have a good, honest debate and think about this, it would be this group. And you're describing something that went very differently.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that there was a faction of the board, 2 to 3, 2 in particular, who came in, for lack of a better term, guns blazing, and like were absolutely adamant about discrediting the research that had been done. They spent, 10 hours in the archives and found some things in the archive and determined that they were better historians than, well internationally known historians that are faculty members at the university. And then that's the approach that they took. It went on an approach of this was bad research. Our faculty don't know what they're doing, and therefore we can't accept this. And so it completely, in many ways, went away from the actual conversation of whether or not these individuals had done things that we don't deem appropriate for them to be on our buildings. And so that is in many ways why it went so awry. In fact, I mean, if you recall back, there were situations where, folks had come into our meetings and completely halted the meeting in the middle of it because it was so far from the conversation, and quite honestly, just untruths were being spoken from board members. I would say it was one of the lowest moments I ever experienced as a regent. Mm-hmm. Perhaps not the lowest, but one of the lowest for sure.
Come back next week and we'll talk about that lower moment. No, Kevin, this is, again, a disheartening and frustrating story, but it's not unique. The Minnesota Historical Society has struggled with this becoming a very politicized conversation. Mm-hmm. And as dangerous as it is to talk about partisan politics right now, there were, I think, universally Republican members of the Minnesota legislature who were saying, we will strip Minnesota Historical Society of its funding if you move forward with some of these renaming pieces. How complicated is it that it gets into that partisan political space, and why does it get there?
Yeah. So again, I think this is people thinking about the purpose of history, right? And there's sort of this idea, and it's not solely Republican. We certainly have heard from both sides that are on both sides of this, depending on their affiliation in particular with Fort Snelling. If they have a military background, honoring that particular part of the past is very important. If they don't, they might have a different viewpoint. And that's not partisan. But I would say that this gets at the idea of what is the purpose of history? And the idea that history is there to teach us the positive things and move us forward and give people to be something to be proud of, right? And I think a lot of history over the past several centuries has been taught that way, that we hold up these ideals, people that were famous, Jefferson, Ben Franklin, others, and that idea that it's intended to inspire rather than as a critical exercise of looking at the past. And it gets complicated now, and I think calling out Minnesota is not really wanting to deal with this sometimes is absolutely accurate. And I think part of that is because we're now trying to surface and really center stories of people who haven't been included before. And I think in particular at Fort Snelling, that's complicated with the history of that site that doesn't go back 200 years, which is the 200th anniversary of the fort this year. It goes back thousands of years. And there are indigenous and native presence at this site that is just as important to this state and to the people of this state. And everyone needs to know that and understand that. So it's about that complexity of understanding the purpose of history and really doing some critical examination. And again, getting at the values of naming something is a sign that we honor it. And if we're only honoring things that were decided back in the 1850s and the 1890s and the 1920s and not re-examining that, that's really problematic for people who aren't represented in any of them.
And I would just add, if I can, Tane, real quick, one of the reasons why I think it becomes such a dichotomous conversation is I think folks approach it as it can only be either or. These individuals were like horrible or they were really good, right? And so it's not, if from my value judgment, I would say that they are bad people if they were racist, right? Or if they were, sexist or anti-Semitic or what have you. And they may have grown the university or grown X place to, a place that it may not have gone without them being in their role. And both of those things can coexist. Yet, as Professor John Wright, the historian, said during this time, no one has a permanent lease on honor. And so it can be both.
I am so happy that we are arguing for nuance 8 days before an election. This is great. This is good. Let me ask you, though, pushing on that, and there'll be people at home who think that this is probably a stupid question, but I think it's really important and valuable. You've noted that there's kind of at least two ways to look at history here, right? Like one, which is kind of how a lot of us who went to school, public school in the last couple centuries, like have experienced it, of myth making, you could argue, of like, these are great people, great moments, like, and this is sort of like a thing to follow and lead. And then another one, which I think we would all admit, like, it's much messier and much more complicated, and looking at sort of the good and bad of everything. Why is that second version necessarily always better? Is it always necessarily better? Because I can imagine people, again, on all sides of a political spectrum, at certain times, finding the value in myth making and holding up somebody as sort of, no, we're better off just thinking about George Washington or Alexander Hamilton as sort of like this person who did these great things. And I don't know, I'm interested in that tension between holding up history as that myth-making piece, which I think serves a purpose, and the purpose of actually looking at it wholly and honestly. Kevin, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great point. Every society needs heroes, right? And this is what it kind of comes down to, is those heroes they show a particular value that's important to a society, whether it's hard work, the pulling yourself up by your bootstraps sort of mentality sort of thing, pointing to things that are exemplars of what you should act like as we go forward. So there are times that is valuable. However, the piece of that gets really troubling is when that's the only thing that you look at about a person, is that single value that they're talking about or want to represent. And when they start to get challenged, or that value starts to get challenged by other values that person embodies or actions that they took, if you're not willing to look at it, that's when it's problematic. You can honor Alexander Ramsey and Kaufman and Jefferson for the things that they did that contributed to the positive part of society, but to ignore the things that are problematic or perhaps represent painful aspects of our history, that doesn't work for me as a professional historian. You need to have that sort of aspect, and that's okay to start with that small nugget, but you really do have to look at the interconnections if you want to be honest.
Well, and I mean, the other part, I completely agree, Kevin. Thanks for adding that. And I would suggest that if we don't look at those other components, it upholds the supremacist notions that we hold in the Western world and in the United States. To assume that our history is completely, void of any sort of wrongdoing, number one, is just a lie. But then number two, upholds white supremacy and supremacist notions of, you can talk about it in terms of the US and the way that we look at the rest of the world. You can think about it in terms of the Western world and how they look at it, other countries. And then even within our own borders, the notion that nothing was done incorrectly or wrong is going to continue to perpetuate that. And we can take it to patriarchy. We can put the isms behind the different terms. But that will continue to perpetuate that if we don't look at the full story and assume or pretend or create the false narratives that everything has been good.
Yeah. I have a million more questions for you all, and I have at least a couple that we're going to come back to. But what we should do right now is pause and turn the virtual stage over to the cast of the Theater of Public Policy, who's going to take all this super fun stuff that we're talking about and turn it into improv comedy. It's very good. It's very important. And I'm so grateful. Everybody, can you do a big round of applause with me for Kevin and Abdul for being our fabulous guests? We're going to have them back in the second half of the show to answer your questions. If you have questions, please Put them in the chat now, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter. Destiny, who's in the control room, will be able to gather them all and put them out to us so that we can ask them in the second half. But before that, we're going to turn it over to the cast of the Theater of Public Policy. Like I promised at the top, everything that they do is entirely made up on the spot, all off the top of their heads based on what we just discussed. And this is super. I'm actually get to, for the first time, be with Alexis for almost a year because we haven't been able to be together for a long time. So I'm going to see improv in real life. You all get to see it on a screen. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop talking. Please, a big round of applause for the Theater of Public Policy.
I just don't see why we can't name the building after my great-great-grandfather. He was a very prominent man in this part of the country.
We're not disagreeing with that. It's we want to honor him just like you do. It's just the problematic parts.
Okay. Look, nobody's perfect, right? I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything. We know in our family history, he used to like to push little kids and take their Halloween candy. We admit it, okay? It happened. We're not trying to hide anything here, but
it just feels like it's a mistake to name the theater's costume department after him. That's that's a red flag from what I understand. He hated costumes. He stole children on the one day everybody dresses up,
Yeah, okay, sure. He might have done that, but consider...
it's not he might have. He would take video of himself. I think he'd set up his camera, say, watch this, here come some kids, and then he'd run, push them down, steal their candy.
Yeah, but he also did other wonderful things, like he invented a whole new way of distributing that video. We wouldn't have the kind of media that we have without that. So did a couple of little kids maybe lose their candy? I'm not even going to say yes or no. I'm going to say some people think so.
We're not even talking about the biggest red flag. Lots of people share names. I get that. More than one person has a name. But we're not going to name it the Hitler Costume Studio. Ooh,
Hello.
I'm the ghost of the Hitler Costume Studio.
Well, hi, I am the statue of Confederate Bill. And, I'm really pleased to meet you.
Very nice to meet you as well.
I understand that you have some problems with naming just like I do. They want to take me down just because, I used to drink a lot and, fought for the South and was just had a mouth like a sailor. That's what I had. I had a mouth like a sailor.
I still have a mouth like a sailor, but it's not about that. They want to take away my name because it's somebody else's name who was a real S-bag. And I may have stolen children's candy, but you can't compare me to that S-bag,
Okay, Fred. So here's the issue, sweetheart. History is supposed to make you smile. I really appreciate your report, and it was very thorough. But now I feel a little sad, and I just made a few edits. If you want to take a look at them, just a few revisions. We'll talk about your grade.
Well, but Miss Peterson.
Yes.
When I wrote this paper about Henry Sibley, I thought we were supposed to be very accurate, and he was not a friend to the native peoples, and I don't think it's appropriate for us to have schools honoring him when there are Native American students who go to that school.
Those are very fine points. Yes, Sibley, bad relationship with the natives. We get that. But also maybe there are some moments that we want to highlight, putting that aside altogether. I want you to think of some details that bring you joy, inner peace. Doesn't make you it's something a little less, how do I say, real feeling. Do you know? Something a little more.
Okay. So so I don't have to talk about facts or research or accuracy.
Or just the facts that make you smile, though, sweetheart. I want to be able to read your accounts of history in a way that make me feel good about myself and not question my life choices. And I feel like I'm not finding that energy in what you wrote.
I got one. His last name was Sibley, and that kind of sounds like sibling. And I love my brothers and sisters.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. See, those two things are completely unassociated, and that really makes us think broader about our history and our future and our relationships. I want you to lead with that, Franklin.
I get it. So Henry Sibley is about brotherhood because I love my big brother.
Unity, that's right, and everything else about just, the natives and the disrespect and the colonization and taking land and we can get to that another day, maybe. That we'll put that on someone else's curriculum for another.
All right, so just hear me out. What if we called it the Mr. Rogers Memorial Union?
No. I mean, he just passed recently. The scholarship's not out on him. We can't take that.
But nobody can say anything bad about Mr. Rogers, right? I mean,
yeah, I can think of a few things. Here, I'm going to cut to the chase. The only reason I joined this naming committee is because I thought, we'd get to put in our own names. And I'd like to put in my own name.
Jacob, we can't put your name in.
Why not? I'm building worthy. I can bench
it's a memorial
pounds.
Union and you're not dead, okay? That's reason one.
See, that's the problem. That's what got us into this mess. We're naming buildings after dead people. What we got to do is ignore that. That's the scholarship of history. It's always changing. When we work with the present.
What if you named it after you, and you turn into somebody horrible?
Then you rename it. Come on, man. It's that easy. Listen, we don't have to put the plaques on the buildings with cement. We can put Velcro on them.
Doc, I know you're real eager to check this out, and I get it. It's a gaping hole in my arm, but the truth is, I just don't want to deal with it. I just don't even want to look at it, and I feel like it'll go away. I'll just, keep it moving. I know. I was thinking the same thing, but more inside my head. Could you speak up for me just a little bit? You're making some good points, and I appreciate it. And I could look at it. I could see it's an issue. I could see it could possibly be infected.
I apologize. I was doing my brain to brain thing for a second, and I didn't realize we weren't.
No,
sometimes I need to be reminded to use my voice.
It happens to me a lot. It happens to me a lot.
So here's my Crystal, my concern is that with a wound that size that is gaping and among other things, we can't ignore it. Okay. I think it's, I understand your but no, Crystal, you come back. See, you can't. This is serious. It's going to become gangrenous. I think we need to take you to the emergency meds, and we can't ignore it. It's real life. It's present.
It could get gangrenous, but maybe it could only get gangrenous because you were saying that it could get gangrenous. Almost like you're manifesting the gangrene right in my arm. So I don't even want you to look at it. I'm not gonna look at it. You're not gonna look at it.
Well, I think that's a mistake. I appreciate what you're saying, but again, we got to be honest, and we got to. It's ugly, okay? It's ugly. We got to look at it.
I think that's a perspective issue. You can. I think it's beautiful. It may not feel great, but there's some beauty to it. Maybe to me, it makes it's there. But I don't have to say, "Oh, look, it's there." We all know it's there.
Crystal, you're right, and I don't want to tell you not to look at your arm because but you might lose it. Is all I'm saying.
Look, I'm sorry, but I can't allow you to change the name of the Darth Vader International Spaceport.
Yeah, but do you understand that he turned to the dark side?
Oh, that doesn't matter. I mean, he changed to the dark side, but didn't he change his mind in the end? Why can't we remember the good things that he did?
Yeah, you make an interesting point. But you know, the Empire established the spaceport, and you know, we're free now. And
Okay, so you're just gonna erase the history of the Empire then?
Well, it's not that we want to erase the history of the Empire. Everyone still remembers, you know, Palpatine and the whole like thing, and we just don't want to honor it necessarily like that. You see, Darth Vader, he killed him.
Because when I hear you say that you want to get rid of the Darth Vader International Spaceport, what I hear is that anybody who had any relatives who are Sith have to forget what their history is.
No, by all means, remember that your ancestors were Sith. Okay, that's fine. You know, you have family history. They were Sith. You know, dark side.
Listen to me.
Great.
You will not change the name of that spaceport. You will not change the name of that spaceport.
I will not change the name of that spaceport.
Yes.
I will go back to the other 15 committee members with this. And I will not change. Yes, that you have my vote. I will not change the name of this spaceport.
All right, listen to me one more time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You will get me some blue milk. You will get me some blue milk.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for the cast of the Theater of Public Policy. Now, please welcome back to the virtual stage your host for this evening, Tane Danger.
That was very fun. That was great. Oh, I love this cast. And it's so fun to be here with Alexis. I'm going to try and do a thing that Duck just showed us, because this is the part of the show where I bring up for you all that we are doing this entire season this fall based on your donations. That is what is making this whole theater work right now. In the past, we've been able to do ticket sales. People would buy a $15 ticket to come see a show at the Bryant Lake Bowl, and that was how we were able to do things like pay our amazing improvisers and make all of the investments for technology things, which is actually a lot more now, and all the stuff behind the scenes. But we aren't doing any ticket sales these days. Everything is going out onto the internet for free, which is good. We're happy you're watching. If you are able to, donate now. You will donate money to the Theater of Public Policy if you're able. There are links right now below me on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. Destiny's putting up. You can click, make a contribution, any amount. It really helps. It is literally what is keeping this theater going right now. It is our biggest source of support in these really challenging times. So if you can, it would mean a lot to us, and it would help us out a lot if you can make a donation. But while you're doing that, we're going to keep the show going. I'm going to bring back both our fabulous guests. So please, one more time, wherever you are, a big round of applause as we bring them back up on the screen. Excuse me. Abdul Omari, Kevin Maijala, please, big round of applause. Yay! Okay, they're back. Hi, guys. So glad to have you both back. Okay, so we do have some questions from the audience coming in, and if folks have more questions, they can keep adding them to the chats, and I hope that they will. This is one that came in that I think is really valuable. So, and actually, this would be good for either of you. How much does public perception / opinion factor into whether a renaming effort is followed through or not? Does fear of a backlash change over time as public opinion and understanding changes? So I guess, and maybe just to add a little bit to this, was there any conversation at the university or with MNHS where it's like, oh, we realize we probably should do this, but it's not worth the headache that we're going to have for this?
So I can start. I mean, I think the short answer is it depends on who the constituents are, right? And so, yes, public perception matters, but it also depends, like, who are the folks that make the decision, and then whether or not the public has a say or a role in, say, a reelection or maintaining a job or what have you. So, for example, in the case of, removing the Confederate flag from the Mississippi state flag, that was I think a legislative decision. So I think public perception would play a role in whether or not, elected officials feel like they'll get reelected by the public. In the case of the university, I think it played a major role because the regents are elected by the state legislature. And so I think there were certainly people from the state legislature who were calling in and having conversations with regents about it. The other thing that was big at the university is that we were getting a lot of messages from alumni who felt very passionately, particularly the more messages I received, at least, and a lot of times it would go to all of the regents, were from those who did not want any sort of removal of names. And one in particular that I recall that was pretty fascinating was someone who had the benefit of being admitted to the university a while back, ostensibly had gained some sort of wealth to which they could give back to the university as an alumni, and actually said that they will stop giving to the university if we rename or remove any names, particularly from Coffin Memorial Union, which is fascinating to me because it just perpetuates what that issue was, which some people have access to higher education to build wealth to be able to give back and others don't. And therefore, I'm going to take it away if you rename this building. So I'll stop there. And
so that's really interesting. And like, that is wildly frustrating. I wonder though, because there might be people, and we see this on the other side where people are like, well, I'm not going to support the university until they rename these things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, based on the systemic factors and barriers and oppression that keep some people in the opportunity to gain that wealth and others not, the unfortunate fact is that those with the bigger dollars often end up being the people who have benefited and have a say about keeping a name rather than removing it.
Yeah, and if I can add, I think this is the perfect example of a bird in the hand versus two in the bush, right? It's a concrete piece of a donor is going to stop doing something, and that carries more weight for whatever reason for some people than the idea that by expanding or changing a name, we may actually be welcoming more people in who would give more or just as much. And so that's it's a big struggle. Fort Snelling as one of our state historic sites, actually the control over the name actually is by the state legislature. They have to approve any name change. And we actually did a pretty big public input process last year and engaged people through online surveys, meetings around the state. We received the letters and phone calls from donors and others, and all over the place. And I will say from the surveys, and we asked specific questions about suggestions of names, it was a pretty rough 50-50 split of keeping historic Fort Snelling or make a change, right? So we're kind of caught in the middle right there. And because, obviously there are legislators who have strong feelings one side or the other, we had a number of state reps and senators who wrote a letter recommending that name change. We had others who were not pleased that we were even talking about it. So that is always a struggle. And ultimately, the relationship to whoever is going to ultimately make that decision matters a lot. So,
I'm going to just take off my questioner hat and put on my making a contribution hat for 1 second on you all's behalf, which is this is something I really believe strongly. People come out and are super loud when they are upset and angry and against something. And I totally get that. That makes sense. My plea to you all as people watching, reasonable, thoughtful people, is when somebody does something that you think is good and like a valuable step towards a more just world, be just as loud and supportive of that person. Because I think probably we heard it from Abdul, and I think Kevin, you've said sort of the same thing. The people who are against stuff changing are definitely going to be loud and out there. But then there's often just sort of like you do it, and I don't want to say there's radio silence, but people are like, okay, yeah, sure. And I know that there's probably some people who say, well, it's just doing the right thing. You shouldn't get patted on the back for doing the right thing. I don't know. I'm very pro patting people on the back for doing the right thing if it gets them to do more right stuff down the line. Okay, I do have another question here. This is from Darren, who asks, are there any current renamings that may have been a mistake or renaming discussions going on that need more of a spotlight? I don't know exactly what he means by renamings that have been a mistake, but are there any current renamings that deserve more of a spotlight?
Sure. The troop, which did a fantastic job, referenced Henry Sibley High School, which is undergoing some conversations right now about whether it should remain that name. Full disclosure, I ran the Henry Sibley Historic Site for a number of years. I'm well versed in his history. I'm actually going to talk to the superintendent tomorrow because they're looking for a little more context. I think this is a really important one, especially when it comes to schools and children, and they're being expected to walk into buildings that maybe are named for someone that doesn't represent them as full people. And that's really problematic. So I think that's those kind of issues. And there was a couple of years ago, student-led change to Alexander Ramsey High School in Minneapolis, which changed over to Justice Page Elementary. And I was involved in that process by providing context to students in there because I also ran the Alexander Ramsey House for a while. So there's those kind of things in your local community and in your school districts, I think, are really important. Yes, there's a cost. Yes, there is pain to go through those conversations. Yes, it's going to upset people. But this is, again, about what do you value about this if you're going to keep a name of someone who basically would not count some of their students as being human if they were still alive.
Oh yeah, were you going to jump in?
I mean, I don't have much other than I follow sports quite a bit, and there I would say are still some problematic mascots out there that would need some changing. Like I won't even say the full name oftentimes. So
yeah,
probably following sports, and that's at the high school level. That's at the kind of just monikers for certain schools in general, all the way through the professional sports.
Yeah, the sports piece is huge. And I mean, that is one, it does seem like, I think it's fair to say both at the Historical Society and with the university, hopefully we're kind of holding those to some higher ideals of what we're trying to do. It does seem like the sports piece is really just a monetary question for a lot of folks, or that's kind of what it boils down to. Is that, or am I being too cynical?
Well, I think from an ownership standpoint, it oftentimes is a financial component, but I think that there are people who discredit or discard the negative and hurtful impacts that sports teams can actually have and do have.
100. Yes, I guess I was like, it seems like a lot of these owners are kind of making a calculation, like they tip over when it's like, oh, this is hurting me more.
Correct.
It's helping.
Absolutely.
Yes. Fair. Okay. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Well, I have another. So we talked in the first half a little bit about how do we design like a measuring stick? Can we even design one as to whether or not things should be named after somebody? Kevin, you actually have something of a spectrum that you've developed.
I do, and it's farcical, and I fully admit that. But I think because this is such a personal decision on who should be honored or not, I've tried to create just the goalposts of what a range is, of people like who is the person we really think should be honored. And I picked Beyonce, right? So Beyonce deserves something named after her. She's contributed great things. She's an incredible business person. Culturally, she's just incredible. And then on the other hand, you have Jeffrey Dahmer. I would hope no one would agree we should do something to honor Jeffrey Dahmer, right? So the Beyonce Dahmer scale, basically, everyone falls somewhere on that spectrum between those two people. Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers was in one of the sketches earlier. Tom Hanks might be another one. Some people might oppose those, and that's okay. But you get further down towards the Jeffrey Dahmer thing, that's really problematic.
I just love that you picked Beyonce. Thank you for that, Queen Bee.
Beyonce's good.
She's amazing, right?
According to this very official scale. Well, this is a piece that I come back to a lot, which is because Kevin, you said this in the first half, but I think about this all the time. Like, maybe we should just not name things after people. Like, because people are flawed. I don't know, like, maybe this is my, like, Protestant upbringing, but, like, people are not perfect. And it's, this is me just speaking at this point. I find it very, like, we're always going to eventually be disappointed in people to some degree about something. And so maybe naming our places or our institutions or our buildings after them is just a fool's errand. I don't know. I mean, Kevin, you already said, I don't know. What do you think, Abdul?
Yeah, I mean, there's been, well, let me say this first of all. I certainly don't think that you should have a building named after you because you donated a bunch of money. All right. And that is something that we also frequently do. We might not say that, right? Like, there's still a naming committee and we go through this process. But, like, if you look at some of the buildings, like in the athletics areas and stuff, a lot of times it's like, oh, you donated, $10 million or what have you. And then boom, where you get naming rights on this building. So, I mean, I would be perfectly fine with not having, when I lived at the University of Minnesota, the dorm was fairly new that I lived in, and it was called Riverbend Hall because it was right along the river. And then later they renamed it to Udolph Hall, who had recently moved on to a different university. But yeah, we can certainly find new ways to name buildings. And then, I think we can also go after this, motto and saying that I mentioned earlier from John Wright, which is that there's no permanent lease on honor. And so, what does that look like from a permanent standpoint? Should it be a constant process of looking at certain names, or, you can only be on a building for 5 years, or I don't know. So that's something else to consider. But yeah, we can have buildings 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and along the number spectrum.
I have heard of, actually in the more monetary context, institutions saying you can buy the naming rights for this plaza for 25 years for $100 million. And then after 25 years, we're going to like auction it off to the next rich person, which, yeah, I don't know, but maybe there's something like that with people in general. I have another question, though, which actually, this is a really good question. So I have 2 questions left, both from the audience, and they're both good questions in terms of how people can actually, if they're moved and impassioned by this conversation and they want to be more involved and connected, how they can do that. So one is a very kind of heavy thing, but it's important. How do you grapple with generational differences if the understanding of how and why something is problematic may change from one generation to the next? Do you think as a whole we're becoming more understanding as to how and why certain names need to change? And I think that this is, again, to just sort of maybe broaden this out slightly, I think that there's probably a lot of folks watching right now who maybe are like, yeah, I get it, but I don't know how to talk to so-and-so about this, or how do I, go home for Thanksgiving this year and talk about this and bring somebody else around to this idea, or even have this conversation with them. So in that generational piece, or just generally, how do you each think about like bringing this conversation up that has the potential to get so heated so quickly?
Sure. I think the generational piece it's natural and it's important. You really, every generation sets their own sort of standards for what that is. And I say generation very broadly. Obviously, no generation has a single viewpoint, right? But it becomes a dominant narrative as they go forward. So, from that standpoint, it's always going to happen. And what you have to engage is in the conversation. And I have these conversations with my dad, who's 80 years old, about sort of this naming issue and sort of why it's important, because he's a military vet, why it's important to also honor these other things that are there. And it's in that conversation is that actually the work I love in history is that you're expanding your horizon, you're understanding other viewpoints, and that's incredibly important, especially the way, Tane, you referenced how we're taught history in this country. Expanding that viewpoint is the most important thing we can do to build empathy. And ultimately, history has to be about empathy for people that aren't having the same experience as you. And that's, to me, that's the important conversation that happens. I don't know if Historic Fort Snelling's name is going to change. I don't have control over that process. It's up to the legislature. What I do have control over is we're going to tell all those stories. And that is the important part of what we do. The name is important, but changing the name but not changing how we tell the stories would be worse. So we're going to change the stories that we tell.
So I think I think the first part is what Kevin alluded to earlier, which is not treating history as stagnant, right? And it's constantly learning new things and building upon what we already know. I think that the other parts that are important in here are, I get that we are thinking about things differently. We are expanding how we think about them as time goes on and generations and what have you. Also, I think that no matter at what time we are thinking about someone's name being on something, they should be up to like the highest standard that we can possibly think of, right? It should be, in my opinion, the Beyoncés and of the world. And whether we learned information later or knew it at the time, then perhaps that means that they are not living up to that standard, right? If it's the highest that we're thinking about, even if those standards that we look at have shifted in new generations. I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. I mean, there are certain people at the university who their acts were not only, in my opinion, like unethical and lacked values and what have you, but they were also illegal at the time in the state of Minnesota and nationally. In situations where, presidents took over and reversed policies, and then the former president came back in and went back to the discriminatory policies, and those names still sit on our buildings now, right? And so I think that in situations like that, in my opinion, it's a little bit easier to say, yeah, perhaps this person doesn't belong there. I could say more, but I'll stop.
Well, that is perfect. The last question that was an audience question, and I think it's very valuable to end on. If folks really want to get more involved in this, how do they do that? And Kevin, you alluded to sometimes the decisions for who actually gets to make like a name changing thing might not be something everybody who's watching is in a position to do. But there are ways for people to be involved, to tell the stories, to learn. So I would go to either of you or both of you. And if folks are watching and they really want to stay with this and help, what can they do?
Well, I think, B'nai Makaska is a good example of a name change process that was painful, but it took a lot of people coming together and understanding the issue and pressing through a process. And one of my coworkers was heavily involved in that, helped lead the way on it. And you really have to understand the process that you're going to go through. You have to be able to engage in really tough conversations with people who don't agree with you, which in our current political environment is very, very tough. And you have to be tenacious, and you have to be persistent. And it's constant pressure applied consistently over time. That's what you need to do to get to these things. Nothing is going to happen quickly, especially when you're battling systems that basically keep the status quo as it is. And I think we all see that in our everyday lives.
I agree. I mean, that the first piece I think is just, educating yourself and thereby then beginning to have conversations with other people and educating them. And then I would say get bold, use whatever resources and whatever influence you have. Imagine if there was a sign on 35W as people were driving through rush hour when COVID is not around, and it says, X buildings at University of Minnesota are named after racists. People would start to see that and start to think about that if there's a big old billboard. So I think, being bold and thinking outside the box can also be influential in how we approach it.
Be bold, be brave. These are really valuable things. So thank you both so much for this really valuable, amazing conversation. We are going to turn the stage over one more time to the cast of the Theater of Public Policy. I'm not going to do a whole long spiel here. I'm just going to say, like at the top, everything they do is entirely improvised. It's entirely made up based on what these folks just gave us, this wonderful insight and wisdom. So please, one more time, a big round of applause for the Theater of Public Policy.
Hey, I'm Turd Ferguson of the Las Vegas Frat Boys, and I am a problematic mascot. Thanks for having me.
Everybody, Turd Ferguson.
Hey, Turd.
Thanks. It's taken me a while. Obviously, people have talked to me about it. I was kind of in denial. It's not appropriate to misappropriate. But I'm here. I'm finally here. I'm trying to acknowledge the problem. I'm part of it. And again, your support is awesome.
We're proud to have you. You know, that's the first step, admitting that you are the problem and that you want to get better.
Okay. Yeah, I want to. I do. Thank you, man. I do want to get better. It's
we have somebody new here. Would you please introduce yourself?
Hi.
Hey, bro.
Yeah, Liz. Thanks for having me. This is my first meeting. I didn't know that this was gonna be such a problem, but yeah. Hi. My name.
It's okay.
Okay. Thanks, man. Thanks. All right. I'm just gonna say it. I'm Goldie Gopher. Okay. And
what? Whoa.
I know.
Seriously, bro?
Yeah, I know. The thing is, I didn't realize how much I dug up people's yards and stuff, you know?
Honey, it's a great neighborhood. Academics are on point, but I really don't think we should send Henry to Dahmer Academy.
But Dahmer Academy has such initiative. The students there are really bright and attractive, and don't you think that he would fit in with the Dahmers?
Okay, see, and that's a problem. It's just, are you not seeing how that just Dahmer, even saying Dahmer and fitting in with the Dahmers, that might be, that's.
Well, I mean, I get it, but what we can't just forget that Jeffrey Dahmer was a thing, right? Like, because that just invites more serial killers.
No, I think it's not about forgetting. It's about not taking your 9-year-old and entering in school. Can you imagine? Like the holidays and things, and we're talking about the kids and their success and their academics, and we have to say our child goes to Dahmer.
I hadn't really thought about that. Like what happens? What do you think they serve in the lunchroom at Dahmer Elementary School?
I can't believe it. You got a 25-year naming lease? I can't be good for that long.
That easy.
I asked you to go for 5, maybe 10 years. How am I supposed to stop womanizing, stop drinking, stop being bigoted, stop using illegal substances for 25 years? I'm going to be 85 years old by then.
You talk about it like it's difficult. I mean, all the biggies are illegal. I mean, genocide's illegal, so you can't do that.
Okay.
You can't murder, so that's off the table.
Fine.
I mean, this is going to be a cakewalk. All the big things are taken care of. You just got to do the little things.
You know, it's not even so much the big things that I'm gonna miss. You know, genocide never really interested me. Too much planning. It's okay. I was fine with that. But just kind of like the subtle sexism. Maybe being inappropriate in situations where I might hold the power. I was really looking forward to a little bit of that, man.
All right, troops, welcome to Fort Vitamix. Line out there, you go, square away. Welcome to Fort Vitamix. Here we're gonna change your future. You over there in the green shirt, basically out of uniform, looks like a name tag that was pasted across your knee says, David. You. What motivates you? What brought you here?
Well, I have to tell you that I came here because, well, I've been pretty disillusioned, to tell you the truth. I just you know, this is the only place that's not named after Beyonce, and I'm just tired of every place I go to being named after Beyonce. I mean, Beyonce's great. Don't get me wrong, but I went to Beyonce elementary school, junior high school. When I applied to jobs, like nobody knew if I went to a good school or a bad school because everybody goes to Beyonce University. And well,
I understand. Look, I drive a Beyonce. Do you understand? I drive a Beyonce. Can't get away from it. You know, and I like your attitude because here at Fort Vitamix, it's really about bringing everyone together and blending it real good. You over there in the little fancy shirt. Yeah, you. You don't even have your name taped on. What brings you over here to Fort Vitamix? What is it about Fort Vitamix that gets you going?
I want to be someone new. I don't want my old life anymore. I don't want that baggage.
Oh, so why do you think Fort Vitamix could help you change to unload, son?
Because you could be anybody now. It's a blank slate. I mean, nobody knows that I went to Dahmer High School or that I went to Gacy Elementary or any of those Night Stalker preschool. I don't have to go to any of those.
You know what that is fun? That's right. You come here for a fine education. You know, look, the Vitamix has a long history of basically just being perfect. You know what I mean? Here at Fort Vitamix, we expect perfection. We don't care where you went to school or nothing about your past, none of that. We just want to make sure that you want to come here with a clean slate and you just take on what we give you.
Thank you. I'm sorry about the name tag. I'm just embarrassed. You don't know how hard it is to be named Charles Manson.
All right.
Yes.
Ma'am, I thank you. I hope you enjoyed the great Patriots victory today. I know you're a season ticket holder. We're doing a little bit of market research. We're considering a name change for the mascot. Would you still root for the team as hard if they became the New England Patriarchal Colonial Landowners?
I think you're going to have to break that down for me, but I'm interested.
All right. So, you know, the patriarchy, that refers to how it was very much like a white male dominant culture.
Yep, I'm with it. Yep.
Yeah, founding fathers, you know. Okay.
Little pantaloonies, yep.
Okay, colonialists. You know, the land that the stadium sits on used to be Native American land. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Actually, you know, yes. Yeah. And you seem to be from a fairly affluent part of town. I'm pretty sure that you were not the first person who settled that land. May I ask, like, where you got the money to you know, buy that nice home that you come from?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I'm originally from, we had a plantation in South Carolina. Am I right?
Okay. I don't think we even have time to go into that.
Oh.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for the cast of the Theater of Public Policy. Now, please welcome back to the virtual stage your host for this evening, Tane Danger.
Hey, that was great. That was hilarious. Yes. So, thank you all so much. Alexis and I are still in the same room, and I have a terrible echo. Anyway, hey, this was great. Thank you so much to everybody who's watching at home for being part of the show. Look, it's Alexis behind me. That's so weird and fun. Hey, I gotta say one more time, a big thank you to Finnegan's Beer for being our beer sponsor. Please go out, get some Finnegan's Beer. They're a great company. 100% of their profits go to feeding the hungry, and it's really good beer. This tile mosaic is delicious. So go there. You can use a code T2P2 on their website for 20% off. I am going to say, sorry, Dennis, I didn't give you a heads up on this. I have to do a quick plug. So we have a great show next Monday, and then next Tuesday, you're probably aware, there is an election, and we are doing a very special election night program with a group from New York called Emrika, which is a group of 3 Middle Eastern comedians who are going to come on and talk to us. They started doing comedy together in 2016 and sort of looking at what it's like to live in America as an immigrant in this very strange time. And they are going to be our guests for a special election night program live here online from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock Central Standard Time. I'll be hosting with these three fabulous comedians from largely New York. Members of the Theater of Public Policy will be there. We'll have some election night analysis, mostly though comedy, because we're not going to probably really know anything at that point in the evening. And so why not just have some fun? I keep telling people, like, it'll be basically the same thing that CNN is doing, except that these are professional comedians as opposed to whatever it is on CNN. So, okay, with that, I am going to say thank you so much one more time to our two incredible guests. This was one of the best conversations I've had all year. So thank you so much. Abdul Omari up there is in the corner. Kevin Maijala is here, so big round of applause for them. And one more time, a round of applause for the cast of the Theater of Public Policy. Brandon Boat, I don't know if I'm doing this in the right order. Fred Chang, Duck Washington, Aaron Roberts, and right next to me, Alexis Camille. There, we're in the same room. It's so weird. Okay. Hi. See, I'm right there and I'm right here. And thank you so much. Dennis Curley is up in the control booth. He's amazing. We will see you next Monday and next Tuesday, both nights. Please join us. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and we will see you next time. Good night, everybody. Drinking this beer.